Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone's having a wonderful day. I am streaming live from my house, streaming to you throughout the Tri-Cities, Northern Michigan, and the Thumb. So, hello, Delta College. Hello, Bio 153 students. I hope everyone's having a splendid day. So, today we're going to talk about Chapter 25, which is all about human nutrition and the biochemistry of nutrition, metabolism. So, you probably have seen this pyramid before here, the My Pyramid, and this changes from time to time. I know some of you are taking the nutrition class at Delta right now, and ultimately this pyramid is about the amount of servings you should have per day in these different food categories for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So that gives you an idea. So you can see, there should be a good amount of grains and vegetables and fruits and an area for milk and things like that. A little bit of meat off to the side and even a little line there for oils. When it comes to different oils you may cook with, olive oil, corn oil, things like that. So diet is a very important part of your body and well-being for the week. But you also don't want to forget about your fitness. It's very important to get exercise in every day too, at least 30 minutes a day. And so that's very critical, especially to keep your immune system up, especially now that we live in the age of the coronavirus. And so very important to get that fitness in every day, keep that immune system high. So, there's still people outside walking and running and things like that. So I went out running last night and saw a lot of people out running and biking and walking, of course, within distance of 6 feet or more spread apart. But your diet's important too. You got to keep the immune system up, and so fruits and vegetables can really boost that immune system. Drink your orange juice, eat your vegetables, eat your fruits. Very, very important. So those are two very important parts of your daily life. Now, some of us are calorie crunchers. And so we might look at things such as kilocalories or large calories. And ultimately, the calorie concept is looking at the overall measurement of the energy of foods. And some of us might look into that when you're buying your foods. How many calories are in my food? So definitely some things to think about. So here is that healthy pyramid again. And we get an idea of the amount of servings you should have per day in these different items. Items in the bottom of the pyramid, you definitely need more of than the items in the top of the pyramid. So that's something we can kind of see here. So on the bottom here, you should be getting a lot of whole grain foods during the course of the day. Of course, exercise, weight control, critical too. So I don't know what you had for dinner tonight, but I had some whole wheat pasta. So getting my whole grains in. And so that was wonderful. And then, of course, I had my vegetables too. Vegetables are very critical. You always need a vegetable with every dinner. That's so important. So I had some nice asparagus, grilled that, and it was very, very delicious. So vegetables should be in abundance. Fruits, you should also be eating a lot of fruits. I had some fruits today, so I had some cantaloupe this morning for breakfast, and maybe you had something similar to that too. Plant oils, of course, are very healthy to cook with for sure. And then you don't want to forget about your nuts and legumes. So if that's maybe eating some pecans or walnuts, something along those lines, peanuts, and of course lightly salted, or no salt at all is probably a good way to go. And then of course you want to make sure to have some eggs in your diet is critical. Chicken, lean meats are key as well. Fish, if you like fish, very healthy in the diet. And then as we get farther up here, again, you should definitely not have a whole lot of red meat, butter in your diet. Definitely should try to stay away from that if need be. Okay, so some terms you can see here, right? We have the term here known as the nutrient. Okay, the nutrient. So, the nutrient, this term here, is referring to promoting normal growth, maintenance, and repair. Ultimately, this is based off of the food you're eating. Are you eating a good abundance of vegetables or fruits? So, very important. And then, of course, in your diet, we have what are known as major nutrients. Those are classified as carbohydrates, lipids, and your proteins. But other nutrients we need to consider that we don't want to forget about in your diet are vitamins. So vitamins are very critical. You get a lot of vitamins from your green leafy vegetables. So vitamins coming a lot from vegetables and even fruits. And you don't want to forget about your minerals either. So that's also important to incorporate into the diet. And of course, water. A lot of people think they're hungry, but more than likely, a lot of people are dehydrated and they're not drinking enough water in a 24-hour time frame. So it is important to stay very hydrated. That's very key to stay healthy, to not end up getting a virus like the coronavirus. It's very important to stay hydrated and drink lots of water, okay? So a well-balanced diet, exercising, drinking lots of water can be great preventative measures to hopefully not get the coronavirus. Okay, we're now going to go through each nutrient. And again, the biggest thing about the diet, it's important to eat in moderation. Anytime someone goes to the extreme, they eat way too many carbohydrates or barely any, that's when someone usually gets into trouble health-wise. So, carbohydrates are broken down into two major categories. So we have what are known as complex carbohydrates and simple carbohydrates. So complex carbohydrates and simple carbohydrates. The complex carbohydrates are more the ones that we should be eating in our diet. Not only do they provide you with energy, and of course we need that to do exercise and just our daily life, but they also provide nutrients for you. So they're very, very good for you. A lot of Americans get into trouble because they eat way too many simple carbohydrates. These are considered empty calories because they only provide energy. So once in a long while, it's probably okay. I mean, it's hard to deny yourself eating Christmas cookies or pies during the holidays. So okay, it's going to be an all right thing once in a long while. But if someone's eating, pie every night, cookies every night, then we get into trouble. So complex carbohydrates is what we should be incorporating into our diet quite a bit. And then there's also the simple carbohydrates. All right, so this overall summary of carbohydrates, again, is showing the extremes. Again, we want to eat carbohydrates in moderation. If you eat way too many, so excess amounts, then we're talking about someone who ends up with obesity. We're talking about someone who might develop type 2 diabetes. Okay, so again, moderation is important. Or if someone simply does not eat enough carbohydrates in their diet, then we're talking about someone that has tissue wasting, maybe because they have an eating disorder. They're just not keeping up with their food intake, they're in negative caloric intake, and that can be extremely dangerous on the body. Okay, next we're going to talk about fats, triglycerides. So triglycerides, fats, lipids, same thing. They usually get a bad reputation. People are always wondering how much fat is in each item. There are fats that are healthy that we should be having in the diet, and some we need to be careful of and stay away from. Here are some pictures of things we should be staying away from in the diet, such as trans fats. These are the hydrogenated oils, okay? Hydrogenated oils. So this picture here is kind of showing you some of these hydrogenated oil areas, the Oreo cookies here, probably should be staying away from those. The Pop-Tarts, okay, those aren't very healthy either. So very important to stay away from a lot of those types of items. Even the hydrogenated peanut butter, important to stay away from that too. Margarine butter. So again, important to stay away from the trans fats. So you're seeing a lot more companies showing 0 trans fats, and hence it's a marketing way, but again, important to keep them out of your diet. The other types of fats you need to be careful of, you don't want too many of them. You can see here, which are the saturated fats. So the saturated fats we find in a lot of red meat. We think of steak. We love grilling, I'm sure, but important, again, of how many you're getting into the diet, because those saturated fats are found in a lot of red meat. And the saturated fats, of course, are the ones that are solid at room temperature. So a lot of us like to grill in the summertime. Maybe we're starting to grill now, perhaps, with the weather getting a little warmer. And it is important to make sure you're not grilling too long. You don't want to burn your meat, because a lot of that burnt meat that's carbon now is carcinogenic. So again, very important to watch how long you're cooking your meat, and important to cut off the fat on the meat. Some people like to eat the fat because it has taste to it, but again, probably better not to eat the fat. Better to cut it off to be on the safe side, because as you can see, if you eat lots of trans fat, saturated fats in your diet, then you significantly increase your risk of heart disease. You also increase your risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and colon cancer. So it's very important to be careful of how many fats you are taking into your diet when it's especially more of the trans fats or the saturated fats. The fats that are healthy in your diet are the unsaturated fats. So these are the ones considered to be liquid at room temperature. And what we saw previously, saturated fats are the ones that are solid at room temperature. The unsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature. These are the ones that you should be cooking with. So a lot of vegetable oils, olive oil, very healthy to be cooking with. I know I do. I cook with olive oil. I don't use the butter on the pan and have butter burgers, like Culver's. That's extremely unhealthy for you. Yes, it tastes wonderful, but very unhealthy for the diet. So I usually do cook with olive oil. So again, a lot better to be cooking with your monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats. Another type of healthy fat we can see here are the omega-3 fatty acids. Notice the sometimes essential fatty acids. We typically find these types of fats in fish oil. So fish is extremely healthy for you. This should be a very important part of your diet. So hopefully you are buying fish. Maybe you're eating fresh fish right out of the Saginaw Bay or Lake Michigan perhaps, but very, very healthy. And you can see here a big thing, if you're eating a good amount of your omega-3s, there's a good chance then statistically that there's less of a chance getting cardiovascular disease. So these are two very important types of fats that are healthy in the diet, the omega-3 fats and the unsaturated fats. Just like we saw with the carbohydrates, there should be a moderation to the amount of lipids, fats in the diet. So again, if someone's eating way too many fats, they're eating an excessive amount of the saturated fats. We're talking about someone who eventually will be obese. They increase their chance of cardiovascular disease, possibly even cancer. And of course, if they're not eating enough fats, we're talking about weight loss. And maybe it's not healthy weight loss. Maybe it's very unhealthy and negative caloric intake, again, someone who struggles with an eating disorder. And of course, fats do provide you with a lot of energy, sometimes even more than carbohydrates. Okay, next we're going to talk about proteins. Proteins are a very important part of the diet. And you need a lot of proteins in your diet, just for overall proper thinking and cognitive abilities, and having those abilities in your brain to take an exam and to think through things properly. Proteins are so critical. You can see all of the functions of proteins right down here. So they provide you with some energy. You can see that there. They are very important when it comes to the structural buildup of antibodies. and are very important structural components of cells, and even very important when it comes to hormones and enzymes, which are part of proteins as well. They're formed from proteins. So what we're looking at here, the building blocks for proteins, of course, are amino acids. And we have here what are known as essential amino acids. Essential amino acids. So the essential amino acids are amino acids that must come from your diet. Okay, they must come from your diet. And if you are eating meat as a part of your diet, you're eating fish, you're eating beef, you're eating chicken, pork, etc., then you're getting all these essential amino acids into your diet. But for people that might be vegetarian and they have the vegetarian diet, it sometimes can be a little bit more complicated to get the proper amount of essential amino acids into the diet for proteins, because a vegetarian diet ultimately is a combination of incomplete proteins. So it's a nice fine balance that the person needs to perform. So maybe it's a matter of eating corn and grains incorporated with beans and other legumes, like lima beans. And if they do a proper balance, they might be able to get all those essential amino acids. But they have to be very, very careful about it. And sometimes it can be a little tricky when you convert from being someone who eats meat to someone that becomes a vegetarian. And they may also be taking some protein supplements along the way too. It definitely is a lot healthier going the vegan way. You significantly decrease your chance for cancer and other types of health issues opposed to beef. And ultimately comes down to a personal choice or belief system. Okay, proteins are broken down into two major categories. So we have what are known as complete proteins and what are known as incomplete proteins. So we have complete proteins and incomplete proteins. So complete proteins, you can see those here. The complete proteins are going to ultimately have all the essential amino acids. You're getting all of them from your diet from animal sources again, as you can see here. But again, the vegetarian, they're getting more of incomplete proteins in their diet, ultimately coming from plant sources. Okay, plant sources we can see here. The incomplete proteins you can see here are lacking one or more of the essential amino acids. So it can be a little bit more tricky. But as long as they can balance it appropriately, then they might be all right. But sometimes it takes a little bit of time. So important to know these two terms. Complete proteins, ultimately they're getting all their essential amino acids when they're eating meat, versus someone who's a vegetarian, incomplete proteins, where they're coming from plant sources and they need to do a nice balancing act here to get all their essential amino acids into their diet. Okay, another important term to be familiar with is what's known as the complementary proteins. Complementary proteins. So we can see here the definition for that. Complementary proteins are referring to combinations of two or more incomplete proteins that ultimately together supply all the essential amino acids. So that's the goal here for the vegetarian. An overall balancing act of getting enough legumes, grains, nuts and seeds, and then other things as well to get all those essential amino acids in their diet. So maybe they're also getting some tofu. Some people like tofu, some people don't. That's something, of course, that you get when you're getting Thai food. So some people don't like it because of the texture, but I don't know. I think it's all right. But everybody has different taste buds, I guess. Or maybe you like your hummus. So again, complementary proteins are definitely another important term to make sure to be aware of and to know. Okay, just like we've seen previous, again, it's important that we eat proteins in moderation. We definitely don't want to overdo it, and we definitely want to make sure you're not having a deficit. So people that eat way too many proteins will become obese. High cholesterol is a big threat, and of course, kidney stone development can take place. And kidney stones are extremely painful, and we'll get into that more when we get into our urinary chapter in the days ahead. Again, if you're not eating enough proteins in your diet, okay, you have these deficiencies. These are the side effects. Of course, there'll be weight loss. It's probably not healthy weight loss. Tissue wasting again. So negative caloric intake. Again, maybe the person has an eating disorder. They're anorexic. Maybe they have anemia. Okay, iron deficiency anemia. And if you're not getting enough proteins either, this can lead to a lot of pregnancy complications. So important to definitely get your proteins in moderation. Extremely important. Okay, vitamins. Very important to make sure you're getting vitamins in your diet. So that's the question to ask. Are you taking daily vitamins or are you not? I have my daily vitamins. Of course, I admit I'm guilty and sometimes I forget to take them. I should be though. But these are important, these vitamins. There's a proper amount that we should be taking every day in our body. And that's ultimately important, these vitamins, for our overall health and growth. So, there are two major types of vitamins. There are water-soluble vitamins and fat-soluble vitamins. So, water-soluble vitamins and fat-soluble vitamins. The water-soluble are called that because they're dissolved in water. Like some of them I have mentioned here, vitamin C, thiamine, biotin, etc. And then the fat-soluble are stored in the fat. And we've mentioned already in the last chapter that fat-soluble vitamins are ultimately stored in the liver. So we can see a lot of these examples right there. So the majority of your vitamins you're getting from your diet, especially if you're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, you're probably getting the proper amount. But there are some exceptions to the rule of some you don't necessarily need from the diet, such as down here, vitamin D. Vitamin D you're getting from UV light. Of course, a lot of Michiganders, they have a vitamin D deficiency. So, again, from not seeing enough light. And that's definitely the case during the winter time. You know, it's dark and dreary out. And so sometimes a lot of people have that. I definitely had that for a while, the vitamin D deficiency. But eventually my doctor's like, Chris, you need to start taking some vitamin D supplements. We need to get this level up. And now I'm back into the normal range. Vitamin K is another one, another exception to the rule. So vitamin K, we get that from intestinal bacteria. So those are two exceptions to the rule. But the majority of your vitamins you're getting from your diet. So it's very important that you know your vitamins. You'll find in your course packet a list of the vitamins that you need to know. And it's very critical to know the functions of the vitamins for the water-soluble and the fat-soluble vitamins. Please make sure you know your vitamins. Very important. So make sure to study those. You never know. The next quiz might have a matching section of vitamins. And maybe even the exam. Exam 3. So make sure you know your vitamins. Very important to know the functions of the vitamins. We're now going to talk about minerals. So minerals, also essential to the diet. So minerals are broken down into two major categories: major minerals and trace minerals. Major minerals make up roughly about 4% of the human body weight. So major referring to we need a larger quantity of that mineral in the body, in the diet. So you can see some of these here: calcium and potassium, phosphorus, sodium, and chloride. Very, very critical when you start thinking of the importance of many of these major minerals when it comes to heart contraction, skeletal muscle contraction. So very key. The trace minerals make up less than 0.01% of the human body weight. So we may think, well, you know, they're not all that important. But they really are, because let's think if you barely had enough iron in your body. Or zinc. Zinc's important to keep your immune system up. Iron, my gosh, that's so important. Iron to, you know, have that available for oxygen to bind to, so oxygen transfers through the blood. So trace minerals are critical too. And again, you're getting a lot of your minerals from your diet, from fruits and vegetables again. Just like the vitamins, where I mentioned you need to know the functions of your vitamins, you also need to know the functions of your minerals. So it's extremely important to make sure that you are studying the functions of your minerals. And again, there's a sheet in your course packet under lecture handouts that breaks down the minerals you need to know, because there could be a matching section of the minerals on the next quiz, or maybe even exam 3. So make sure to study your minerals and vitamins. A lot of students make flashcards to study the vitamins and minerals, so very important that you study those. Make sure to study those. Very, very important. Metabolism. We kind of leave now looking at nutrition, and now we start to look at overall metabolic types of reactions, metabolism, the biochemistry of nutrition. So what could get any better than this? So, metabolism. This is all about the sum total of biochemical reactions occurring in the body cells throughout our entire body. So, metabolic reactions are broken down into 2 major types. We can see these here. So we have anabolism, or an anabolic reaction, and this is where we start from something simple and we construct a more complex type of structure, like we're seeing here with amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. You put enough amino acids together and voila, you have a protein. Or catabolism, a catabolic process where we're breaking down complex structures into simpler structures. Remember the last lecture, nutrient processing, we talked about catabolic type of reactions. So here it's a matter of having carbohydrates like polysaccharides, which are very complex carbohydrates, and then overall catabolically breaking them down into simple sugars like monosaccharides. So as we make our way and we start looking at all of these different metabolic processes occurring, we look at the biochemistry of our nutrition and looking at the biochemistry of carbohydrates and proteins and fats. We're going to be looking at several different types of reactions, either reactions that are anabolic or reactions that are catabolic. This picture here is illustrating the process of cellular respiration. So cellular respiration, this was something that you guys would have went over last semester in Bio 152, I'm sure in some detail. I'm just going to briefly go over it because I know a lot of this is review for you already. So when we look at this, you were probably taught with cellular respiration that it all started with glucose here, and that it's made up of 3 major areas. Cellular respiration. You start with breaking down the glucose into pyruvic acid, and that stage 1 was glycolysis, right? And you made positive 2 ATP here. And then eventually you made your way into the Krebs cycle down here. And you made a little bit more ATP here, positive 2 ATP. And then the last stage, oxidative phosphorylation, which incorporates the electron transport chain, and you have majority of ATP produced here. And then ultimately, if you added up all the positive gains of ATP through the 3 stages of cellular respiration, glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation, you ended up generating a positive 32 ATP per molecule of glucose being broken down. Actually, there's actual range here when we're talking about eukaryotic cells. So the actual range, which is fine and appropriate for you guys to know when we think of ATP, and of course adenosine triphosphate, right? Very important source of energy. We're thinking of cellular respiration in our muscle cells. The range really, technically speaking, that I'm fine with is 32 to 36 ATP. So 32 to 36 ATP is the appropriate range. There's some variation because of the amount of electron transport carriers. They're transporting electrons from glycolysis to the Krebs cycle and eventually to the electron transport chain. So 32 to 36 would be appropriate for us. Now, another thing here too, maybe you were just taught with cellular respiration that only glucose drives this process. That's not true. Actually, it's your entire diet that drives aerobic cellular respiration. Because, of course, we're talking about the aerobic properties here. So, not just glucose, simple sugars, and carbohydrates. There are areas along the way where proteins are incorporated. There are areas where fats are incorporated into this entire process. So, very critical, this aerobic cellular respiration process here. And this is taking place, again, anytime you're doing aerobic exercise, you're burning the food here and generating the ATP. So very critical to be aware of the amount of ATP produced when you break down one molecule of glucose. All right, next we're going to take a look at carbohydrate metabolism. So that's our next agenda item. Like I said, I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on cellular respiration because you guys should know that already. But we're going to focus on the off branches and take a look here at carbohydrate metabolism. So, when you're going ahead and you're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I don't know what you had for breakfast this morning, but I had some nice scrambled eggs mixed with spinach and tomatoes and ham, and it was really good. Some toast. Just amazing. And whenever you're eating those three major meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, ultimately your glucose levels will spike in your blood. So you're going to end up having a high amount of sugar levels. So a huge increase in your blood glucose levels. They're going to be high. So increase in blood glucose in the blood. Or simply an increase in blood sugar, same thing. So here we are. We have all this glucose that's in the blood. But we need to have a location to store the glucose since we have very, very high blood sugar levels. So what's going to happen is we need to transform the glucose into glycogen. So here's the glucose. Ultimately, we need to form glycogen. You might be asking yourself, well, Chris, what is glycogen? Glycogen is the storage form of glucose. So the glucose, you have enough glucose molecules that become connected together and ultimately form glycogen. Glucose, a simple sugar monosaccharide, glycogen, made up of many glucose molecules connected, and you're forming a polysaccharide, which you find in muscle cells. So we look at this, and how we do this, it's through the process known as glycogenesis. All right, glycogenesis. So we're looking at the formation of glycogen from glucose. That's the glycogenesis. Genesis means new. In this case, we're forming glycogen. And this is the case when your blood sugar levels spike. So this is taking place in liver cells and skeletal muscle cells in the body. But eventually, after you eat, several hours later, your blood sugar levels are dropping now. So imagine that, your blood sugar levels are dropping 4 or 5 hours later. Because you've used up a lot of this energy to exercise or just to do your normal work routine, perhaps. So now it's a matter of considering that your blood sugar levels are dropping. So imagine that. Your blood sugar levels dropping. So now I have the arrow going this way, going down. So decrease in your blood sugar is taking place. And this is the same thing as glucose. So here we have that glycogen. We have a lot of glycogen stored in the liver and skeletal muscle. We need to break the glycogen down so we have a lot more glucose in your blood. How are we going to do this? Well, it's going to be through the process known as glycogenolysis. Glycogenolysis. So simply referring to glycogen being broken down. Glycogen being broken down. Taking place when you have low blood sugar levels, low glucose levels. And there's definitely signs when your sugar levels are really low. When someone's getting to the point of hypoglycemic. So hypoglycemia, hypoglycemic. So some people might be more aggravated, their patience levels are low, maybe they're shaking, they're feeling lightheaded like they could pass out. Those are all signs that sugar levels are getting low. But the body tries to get the glucose into the blood. Trying its hardest to have homeostasis. So glycogenolysis will break down the glycogen into glucose. Lysis means cell splitting. So we're splitting apart cells of the glycogen to form the glucose. This is completely catabolic in nature here in comparison to glycogenesis, which was an anabolic process of building up something big. Sometimes there's situations where your sugar levels get extremely low. And maybe you've actually ran out of your glycogen reserves. You have no more glycogen left. Well, we still have to produce glucose to have in the blood and ultimately in the brain for functioning. So then the body, biochemically speaking, will go ahead and try to come up with another idea. And this is where we're looking at what's known as the gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis. So gluconeogenesis is where the body needs to come up with glucose from something else, a non-carbohydrate source. Glycogen's already been utilized. And so instead, it could be utilization of breaking down your proteins to form glucose, in this case, amino acids. Or maybe another option is to break down fat to produce glucose, in the case of glycerol, which is a building block of fat. This really kicks into high gear again when you've ran out of your glycogen reserves. In the case of someone doing a long fast, they've been fasting for several days, possibly. Somebody who is competing, they're doing really strong aerobic exercise, and they're working out so hard. They've been running a long distance, and they ran out of glycogen. And you feel like you hit a wall. And now, all of a sudden, you're not running on all your cylinders anymore. And now it's a matter of breaking down some fat or proteins to form glucose for functioning of your body, your brain. So I've known plenty of aerobic athletes, that's the case. People who run marathons, friends of mine who run 100-mile races where you're running 20 hours straight without stopping, and you've ran out of glycogen reserves. And now you got to break down fat or proteins. You get to a wall and you got to push through it. You got to push through it. So very important to make sure you know these terms. Glycogenolysis, gluconeogenesis, and of course, glycogenesis. So very important to know that terminology. Part of your homework assignment. Now we're going to take a look at fats. So fats or triglycerides you see here. One thing to think about when it's a matter of making fats is that all pathways lead to fat. All pathways lead to fat, unfortunately. So if someone's eating way too much food, they're eating way too many carbohydrates, or maybe way too many proteins perhaps, they can be converted to fat. How does this occur? Well, let's say that someone has a huge spike in their blood sugar. They just ate an enormous meal. Maybe they went to Subway and they had a foot-long sub and they just ate way too much food. And what will happen to form the fat is what's known as lipogenesis. Lipogenesis. So lipogenesis, okay, referring to the lipids here, genesis, something new. In order to get there, we have to go through cellular respiration first. So we have our glucose here, and we go through glycolysis. Glucose is broken down then into glyceraldehyde phosphate, or sometimes known as glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, 3, this substrate here. And then what can happen then is the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate will be transformed anabolically then into glycerol. Remember glycerol, that's one of the building blocks of fats. And then ultimately, the glycerol is formed into triglycerides. So that's an option there. Sometimes through glycolysis, we continue on and we get to the end of glycolysis and form the final substrate, pyruvic acid or pyruvate. And sometimes that can be transformed into another substrate known as acetyl-CoA. This substrate then potentially can go ahead and undergo an anabolic reaction and form fatty acids. Fatty acids and other building blocks for fats, and then ultimately, here we have it, and we form triglycerides. So lipogenesis ultimately happens to spike a blood sugar. Ultimately, these carbs we're seeing here are formed into fat. And now we have our triglycerides. And again, they can be stored in the adipose tissue or liver. But let's say that several hours go by, and now you have an overall drop in your blood sugar levels. And you've perhaps have used up all your glycogen. We have to come up with glucose for the brain. Well, once again, what will happen then is triglycerides then will be broken down into glycerol. And that is through the process known as lipolysis. So we'll highlight that down here for you. Lipolysis. So lipolysis is all about the breakdown of the fats catabolically into glycerol, or even fatty acids. But we're focusing on glycerol because this can be used here to form glucose if we needed it. And then what can happen from here then is the glycerol is transformed back into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, and then the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate once again becomes glucose. So here we're doing literally reverse glycolysis, literally doing gluconeogenesis right here. So this is taking place again when your blood sugar levels are getting really, really low. Glycerol can be utilized to form glucose. Now, sometimes your blood sugar levels might get very, very low, and you've ran out of glycogen, you've ran out of glycerol, maybe you've ran out of proteins even. And then what we're left with is fatty acids with people that are in severe fasting mode. So what will happen then, lipolysis will start off, catabolic process, the triglycerides become the fatty acids right here, and then what will happen next is what's known as beta oxidation. So beta oxidation. Beta oxidation is the breakdown of fatty acids to acetyl-CoA. So here we have this beta oxidation. This is catabolic in nature here. And we transform the fatty acids. They become acetyl-CoA. And then what will happen then is we can go ahead and transform the acetyl-CoA into ketones. So going from acetyl-CoA to ketones or ketone bodies is known as ketogenesis. Ketogenesis. So synthesis, production of ketones. This happens when people are in starvation mode. Maybe they've ran out of all resources to make glucose for the brain, And now it's a matter of fatty acids being broken down and eventually in time ketones being formed. And now the brain's living off of ketones because the person hasn't eaten in months. Maybe it's somebody dying. They're in hospice care, so a situation like that. Or maybe someone deliberately is not eating because they're anorexic, severe eating disorder, and they're living off of ketones. Sometimes it happens to diabetics. Maybe a diabetic who's not keeping up with their diet, maybe type 2 diabetes, type 1. They have the ketone breath. Maybe you've smelt that before, the ketone breath. Their blood is slipping into ketoacidosis, or type 1. And so they're just producing lots of ketones. Very dangerous situation to be in for those diabetics, for sure. So fatty acids are not used to form glucose. The fatty acids we see here are ultimately going to be used, fatty acids, to form ketones. That's what they do. They do not form glucose. So very important to review this terminology here. So make sure to do that. Okay, so we have a couple review questions here, and then we're going to go on a break. This will be part 1 of the lecture. So, number 1, which of the following are major nutrients? So time to find the iClicker, because it's iClicker time. Which of the following are major nutrients? Which of the following are major nutrients? All right. So based off these choices, I would probably go with choice letter E. Letter E. So both A, B, and C. All 3 of these are major nutrients. Number 2, which of the following are complete proteins? Which of the following are complete proteins? So what would you choose for your answer here? All right, so based off the choices, I would probably go with choice letter D as in dog, both A and B. Complete proteins would definitely be fish and beef, meat sources, but not letter C, tofu. Not tofu, because that is a plant source. Number 3, when someone experiences low blood sugar levels, they haven't eaten in several hours, they're hungry. Glycogen is broken down into glucose by the process called what? When someone experiences low blood sugar levels, glycogen is broken down into glucose by the process called what? All right, so based off the choices, if we're catabolically breaking something down, in this case glycogen into glucose, I would have to say we need to go with choice letter B, the glycogenolysis. So that would be a good choice to go with. Letter B is the correct answer here. And we will stop here for now, and we will pick this up very shortly. So time to take a break. If you need to take a break, use the restroom, get some food, and we'll continue with our biochemistry here shortly.